On the morning that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, Clara Whitfield stood in her wedding gown in an empty church garden, holding a bouquet of white peonies, and watched through a cracked side door as her new husband pressed his lips to another woman's hand and whispered a promise that was never meant for her ears. The ink on their marriage certificate was barely dry. The rice thrown by well-wishers was still scattered across the stone steps behind her. And in that single, frozen moment, Clara understood that the vows she had just spoken with her whole trembling heart had already been broken before the reception cake was even cut. If you believe that even the deepest heartbreak can lead to healing, that forgiveness is possible even when trust feels shattered beyond repair, and that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning, then we invite you to like this video, leave a comment sharing your own thoughts, share this story with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story about kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength of the human heart. Our community grows stronger every time someone like you decides to believe in better days ahead, and we are so grateful you are here with us for this journey. The wedding had taken place on a warm Saturday morning in early June, in a stone chapel on the edge of a small town called Ashworth Hollow, where Clara had grown up chasing fireflies with her father, Walter Hensley, a retired schoolteacher who had raised her alone since her mother passed when Clara was only 9 years old. Walter had walked her down the aisle with tears brimming in his tired eyes, whispering to her that her mother would have been so proud of the woman she had become. Clara had met Nathaniel Bryce 3 years earlier at a charity gala hosted by his family's construction firm, and from the very first conversation, she had believed she'd found a partner who understood her the way no one else ever had. Nathaniel was charming in that effortless way some men are, quick with a joke, generous with compliments, and endlessly attentive in public, the kind of man who remembered the names of waiters and always opened doors. Clara had fallen for him slowly and then all at once, the way honest people often do, without guarding her heart the way she probably should have. The morning of the wedding had begun with so much light. Clara remembered the golden sun spilling through the windows of the bridal suite as her best friend, Margaret Doyle, whom everyone called Maggie, fastened the delicate buttons along the back of her gown, her fingers trembling with excitement rather than nerves. Maggie had been Clara's closest friend since the two of them were paired together on a school project in the 4th grade, and in the years since, she had become something closer to a sister, the kind of friend who could read Clara's silences as easily as her words. As Maggie worked the last button into place, she had looked at Clara in the mirror and told her that she had never seen her look so happy, so certain, so wholly herself. Clara remembered laughing through unexpected tears, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could physically hold in the joy that felt too large for her body. She remembered thinking that this was the beginning of everything good. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of soft organ music, sunlight through stained glass, and the warm weight of her father's hand as he placed hers into Nathaniel's. Nathaniel had looked at her the way she had always imagined a groom should look at his bride, as though she were the only person in the room, in the world. He had recited his vows with a steadiness that made the small congregation of family and friends murmur approvingly, promising to cherish her, to be faithful to her, to choose her every single day for the rest of his life. Clara had believed every word. She had no reason not to. Nathaniel's mother, Eleanor Bryce, an elegant, sharp-eyed woman who had never fully warmed to Clara but had never been outright unkind either, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief during the vows, and Clara had allowed herself to hope that perhaps, in time, she might earn a true place in that family, not just a legal one. It was during the reception, held in the garden behind the chapel beneath strings of white lights not yet lit against the daytime sky, that things began to feel strange. Clara noticed Nathaniel excusing himself more than once, phone pressed to his ear, his voice dropping into a register she didn't recognize, low and urgent, entirely unlike the warm, easy tone he used with guests. She told herself it was business, that even on his wedding day, a man who ran his family's growing firm might have obligations that couldn't wait. She told herself many things that afternoon, each excuse a small brick she used to build a wall against a truth she wasn't ready to face. It was Maggie who first noticed the woman standing near the far hedge of the garden, a striking woman in a deep red dress that stood out sharply against the pastel gowns of the other guests, watching the reception with an expression that was far too intense for a stranger. Maggie asked Clara if she recognized her. Clara did not, though something about the way the woman's eyes tracked Nathaniel across the lawn made her stomach tighten with an unease she couldn't name. She learned the woman's name only later that afternoon, when she followed Nathaniel through a side door of the chapel, intending to surprise him with a private moment away from the crowd, a few minutes to simply breathe together as husband and wife before the demands of photographs and toasts pulled them back into the celebration. Instead, she found him in the small stone garden behind the vestry, standing close to the woman in red, his hand wrapped gently around hers, his voice soft and familiar in a way that made Clara's blood run cold. The woman's name, Clara would learn, was Vanessa Kerrigan, and she was not a stranger to Nathaniel at all. She was someone he had been involved with for over a year, someone he had continued seeing even as he planned his wedding, someone he apparently could not bring himself to leave even on the very day he promised his life to another woman. Clara heard him tell Vanessa that nothing between them had to change, that the wedding was simply a matter of family expectation and business optics, that his heart, his real heart, belonged to her. Clara did not scream. She did not storm forward and demand an explanation, though every instinct in her body urged her to do exactly that. Instead, she stood frozen behind the cracked door, her bouquet trembling in her hands, feeling something inside her chest crack quietly, almost silently, the way ice fractures beneath weight before it finally gives way. She thought of her father waiting inside, glowing with pride. She thought of the guests who had traveled from 3 states away to celebrate this day. She thought of Maggie, who would have marched into that garden and torn the world apart on her behalf if she knew. And in that moment, faced with a truth too enormous to process in an instant, Clara made a decision that would define the difficult months ahead. She stepped back from the door, smoothed the front of her gown with hands that would not stop shaking, and walked back into her own wedding reception with a smile fixed carefully into place, because she needed time, time to think, time to understand what she had just witnessed, time to decide what kind of woman she was going to become in the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The week that followed her wedding was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced, a strange, suspended kind of existence where she moved through the motions of being a new bride while carrying a secret so heavy it threatened to buckle her knees at unexpected moments. She and Nathaniel had moved into the home he had purchased for them on the outskirts of town, a beautiful house with tall windows and a wraparound porch that Clara had once imagined filling with laughter and eventually with children. Instead, she found herself watching Nathaniel with new eyes, cataloging every excused phone call, every late arrival home, every small inconsistency in his stories that she had previously been too trusting, too in love, to notice. She said nothing to him directly. She was not yet ready to hear him confirm what she already knew, because some part of her, the part that still loved him fiercely despite everything, held on to a fragile hope that perhaps she had misunderstood what she'd seen, that there was some explanation that didn't end in complete betrayal. She confided in Maggie on the 3rd day, sitting on the back porch of the house in the bright afternoon sun, her voice breaking as she recounted what she had overheard. Maggie's face had gone pale with fury, and she had wanted immediately to confront Nathaniel herself, but Clara asked her not to, not yet. She needed to understand the full shape of the situation before she decided what to do with it. Maggie, though it clearly cost her enormous restraint, respected her friend's wishes, though she made Clara promise to call her the moment she needed anything at all, day or night. It was Maggie who suggested, gently, that Clara might want more than her own suspicions before she made any irreversible decisions, and it was through a mutual acquaintance that Clara was eventually connected with a private investigator named Owen Faraday, a quiet, methodical man in his 50s who had spent over 20 years helping people uncover truths they desperately needed and desperately feared. Owen took Clara's case with the gravity of a man who had seen too many broken hearts to treat the work lightly. Within days, he had confirmed what Clara already knew in her bones. Nathaniel had indeed been involved with Vanessa Kerrigan for well over a year, a relationship that had continued, uninterrupted, through the entire engagement and wedding planning process. Owen's photographs showed Nathaniel and Vanessa meeting at a small cafe on the edge of town on 3 separate afternoons that week alone, always during the day, always with the easy familiarity of 2 people who had built an entire secret life together. Clara sat in Owen's modest office, the photographs spread across the desk in the harsh light of an overhead lamp, and felt something inside her finally, fully break, not with the sharp violence of the moment she'd first discovered the truth, but with a slow, grinding grief, the kind that settles into your bones and changes the shape of how you carry yourself through the world. What Clara did not yet know, what no one in that quiet office could have anticipated, was that her own family carried a secret of its own, one that would collide with her heartbreak in ways none of them could have predicted. Her father, Walter, had been diagnosed 8 months earlier with a heart condition that required careful monitoring and a surgery he had been putting off, telling no one but his sister, Clara's Aunt Beatrice Langley, because he did not want to cast a shadow over his daughter's wedding. Walter had scheduled the surgery for the week following Clara's wedding, quietly, without fanfare, planning to recover at Beatrice's home in a neighboring town before Clara even knew there was anything to worry about. It was a decision made from love, the same instinct that had guided nearly every choice Walter made as a father, to shield his daughter from pain for as long as he possibly could. On the 7th day after her wedding, everything came to a head. Clara had spent the morning confronting Nathaniel with the truth Owen had uncovered, laying the photographs across their kitchen table in the bright light of a summer morning, watching as the color drained from her husband's face. Nathaniel did not deny it. He could not, faced with such clear and irrefutable evidence, and in the terrible, honest conversation that followed, he admitted things that shattered whatever fragile hope Clara had been clinging to. He told her that he had married her because his mother had pressured him for years to settle down with someone respectable, someone from a good family, someone who would look right at his side during business functions and holiday gatherings. He told her that he cared for her, in his way, but that what he felt for Vanessa was different, deeper, something he had never been brave enough to choose over his family's expectations. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself with anger. He simply confessed, quietly, in the daylight of their kitchen, that he had chosen convenience and obligation over honesty, and that in doing so, he had built their marriage on a foundation of lies from its very first hour. Clara listened to every word without interrupting, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her spine straight despite the storm raging inside her. When Nathaniel finished speaking, she did not scream at him, though she had every right to. She did not throw anything, though the urge burned through her. Instead, she stood, walked calmly to the bedroom, and began to pack a single suitcase with the same steady hands that had held her wedding bouquet a week before. Nathaniel followed her, pleading now, his composure finally cracking as the reality of what he stood to lose settled over him. He told her he was sorry, that he would end things with Vanessa immediately, that he wanted to make their marriage work, that he had been a coward but that he loved her too, in whatever broken way he was capable of love. Clara paused at the bedroom door, suitcase in hand, and told him, in a voice that surprised her with its steadiness, that she deserved a love that did not require her to compete for it, that she deserved a husband who chose her not because it was convenient but because she was the only person he could imagine building a life with. She told him she needed time away, that she could not stay in a house built on a lie, and that she would call him when she was ready to talk about what came next, if there was a next at all. What Nathaniel did not know, what Clara herself barely had time to process, was that her phone had buzzed with an urgent message from her Aunt Beatrice just as she was walking out the front door. Her father's surgery, scheduled for later that same day, had been moved up unexpectedly after his condition worsened overnight, and Beatrice was begging Clara to come immediately, before it was too late to say the things that needed saying. Clara did not have time to explain any of this to Nathaniel. She simply climbed into her car with her suitcase still in the back seat, tears streaming down her face for reasons that had nothing and everything to do with the conversation she had just left behind, and drove 2 hours to the hospital in the neighboring town where her father lay waiting, frightened and alone except for his sister at his side. Nathaniel spent that entire day and the days that followed in a state of escalating panic that he had never experienced in his carefully controlled life. He called Clara's phone repeatedly, but she had turned it off, needing every ounce of her strength for the fear gathering around her father's hospital bed rather than for the wreckage of her marriage. He went to Maggie's apartment, but Maggie, who had learned by then exactly what Nathaniel had done, refused to open the door, telling him through the wood that Clara did not owe him her whereabouts and that if he had any decency left in him at all, he would respect the space she had asked for. He drove to the house where Clara's father lived, only to find it empty and locked. With every unanswered call, every closed door, every dead end, a suffocating dread began to build in Nathaniel's chest, a fear that was entirely new to him, because for the first time in his life, he was confronting the possibility of losing something he had never fully appreciated until it was slipping through his fingers. It took 3 full days for Nathaniel to track down where Clara had gone, and he did so only because Eleanor, his mother, finally intervened. Eleanor had watched her son unravel over those 3 days with a mixture of concern and something that looked almost like disappointment in herself, because she recognized, perhaps for the first time, the role she had played in pushing Nathaniel toward a marriage he had entered without honesty. Eleanor had known about Vanessa for months. She had chosen to look away, believing that once Nathaniel settled into married life, the affair would fade on its own, that respectability and routine would eventually smother whatever reckless attachment he felt for a woman Eleanor considered unsuitable. She had never imagined the cost of her silence would fall so heavily on a young woman who had done nothing wrong except love her son honestly. It was Eleanor who finally called a contact at the regional hospital network, using her family standing to quietly locate which facility Walter Hensley had been admitted to, and it was Eleanor who, in an uncharacteristic act of humility, drove Nathaniel to the hospital herself, telling him during the long drive that whatever happened next, he needed to face it as a man who took full responsibility, not as one still looking for someone else to blame. Nathaniel arrived at the hospital on the afternoon of the 4th day to find Clara sitting alone in a small waiting room bathed in the pale daylight filtering through half-closed blinds, her father having come through surgery successfully but still resting under careful observation. She looked up when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara's face was etched with exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much grief for too many days without rest, and Nathaniel felt, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, the full and unbearable weight of what his choices had cost someone else. He did not approach her immediately. He simply stood in the doorway and told her, quietly, that he was not there to ask her to come home, not there to demand anything from her at all. He was there because he needed her to know that he understood, finally and completely, the magnitude of what he had done, and because whether or not she ever forgave him, he could not let another day pass without telling her the truth about how deeply he regretted the choices that had led them to this room. Clara listened, her arms wrapped around herself as though holding her own body together. She told him that she had spent the last 3 days sitting beside her father's hospital bed, terrified she might lose the one parent she had left, and that in the midst of that terror, she had barely had room to think about her marriage at all, and that this, more than anything, had shown her something important. She told him that a life built with the right person should not require her to choose between grieving one loss and confronting another, that a true partner would have been beside her through both, not the cause of one and absent for the other. Nathaniel had no defense for this. He simply nodded, tears finally breaking through the composure he had maintained his entire life, and told her that he understood if she never wanted to see him again, but that he needed her to know he had already ended things with Vanessa completely and permanently, not as a bargaining chip to win her back, but because sitting with the reality of what he had almost destroyed had shown him, with brutal clarity, who he actually wanted to become. The weeks that followed were slow and difficult, marked by long silences and careful, tentative conversations that neither Clara nor Nathaniel rushed. Clara moved back in with her father temporarily to help him through his recovery, grateful for the distance it gave her from the house she had once imagined filling with a lifetime of shared mornings. Nathaniel, for his part, did not push her. He sent no demands, made no dramatic gestures designed to win sympathy rather than earn trust. Instead, he began the quieter, harder work of proving through consistent action what his words alone could never accomplish. He sought out a therapist, something he had always dismissed as unnecessary for a man who prided himself on control, and began to unpack the years of pressure from his mother, the fear of disappointing his family's expectations, the cowardice that had led him to choose the appearance of the right life over the honest pursuit of it. He visited Walter in the hospital and later at home, not to curry favor with Clara but because he recognized that whatever happened between himself and Clara, he had wronged this gentle, trusting man who had welcomed him into his family with open arms, and he owed him an apology that had nothing to do with reconciliation. Maggie remained fiercely protective throughout this period, watching Nathaniel's efforts with open skepticism, warning Clara more than once not to mistake guilt-driven gestures for genuine change. But even Maggie, over the slow unfolding of that summer, began to notice something shifting in Nathaniel that felt different from performance. He did not ask Clara to forgive him. He did not rush her toward decisions she wasn't ready to make. He simply showed up, again and again, in small and unglamorous ways, driving Walter to physical therapy appointments when Clara couldn't get away from her own recovery, quietly settling medical bills without announcement or expectation of gratitude, sending no flowers or grand declarations but instead handwritten letters that Clara read alone on her father's back porch. Letters in which Nathaniel did not ask for anything but simply told the truth about who he had been, who he was trying to become, and how deeply sorry he was for the pain his cowardice had caused. It was nearly 2 months after the wedding that Clara finally agreed to sit down with Nathaniel for a real conversation, not in the house they had shared for only a single week, but in the same garden behind the chapel where they had been married, a place that held both the brightest and darkest memory of that entire year. The June flowers had given way to the fuller bloom of August, and the garden looked different in the golden afternoon light, both familiar and entirely new, much like the two people who stood within it. Clara told Nathaniel that she had spent the past weeks thinking not only about what he had done but about what kind of life she wanted for herself, with or without him, and that she had come to understand something important about her own worth in the process, a clarity she might never have found had her wedding day unfolded the way she'd once imagined. She told him that forgiveness, she had realized, was not something she offered to excuse what he had done, but something she chose to free herself from carrying the weight of that betrayal for the rest of her life. She told him she forgave him, not because he had earned back the trust they once shared, but because holding on to her fury had begun to cost her more than it cost him. Nathaniel listened with the same stillness he had shown outside the hospital room weeks before, and when Clara finished speaking, he told her that he understood forgiveness was not the same as reconciliation, that he was not asking her to simply return to the life they had planned before the truth came out. He told her that if she needed more time, more space, even permanent distance, he would honor that completely, because for the first time in his life, he was learning what it meant to love someone by prioritizing what they needed over what he wanted. It was Clara, in the end, who suggested that perhaps they might try, slowly and without guarantees, to rebuild something honest between them, not the fairy tale she had once envisioned on her wedding day, but something sturdier, forged through hard truth rather than easy charm. She was careful to tell him that this did not mean instant trust restored, that trust, once broken so completely, had to be rebuilt one small, consistent choice at a time, and that she would be watching closely to see whether his change was as real as it appeared. The months that followed tested that fragile rebuilding in ways neither of them anticipated. Vanessa Kerrigan did not disappear quietly from their lives. She reached out to Nathaniel twice more, testing whether the door she believed she had left ajar might still be open, and both times, Nathaniel not only refused contact but told Clara immediately and completely, understanding now that secrecy of any kind, however small, was the very poison that had destroyed their beginning. Eleanor, too, underwent her own quiet transformation, eventually sitting down with Clara over tea on a bright autumn afternoon to offer an apology of her own, admitting that her insistence on appearances over honesty had contributed to the pain Clara endured, and that she hoped, in time, she might earn a genuine place in Clara's life rather than the polite distance Clara had every right to maintain. Walter, recovering steadily from his surgery, watched his daughter navigate this painful season with a mixture of protective worry and quiet pride, telling her more than once that he trusted her to know her own heart better than anyone else could, and that whatever she decided, he would stand behind her completely. By the following spring, nearly a full year after the wedding that had begun in such devastating betrayal, Clara and Nathaniel stood again in that same garden, though this time the ceremony was quieter, smaller, attended only by the people who had walked through the hardest parts of that year alongside them. It was not a second wedding in any legal sense, since they had remained married throughout the separation, but a renewal of vows that Clara insisted upon, not to erase what had happened but to honor the harder, truer love that had been built in its aftermath. Maggie stood at her side once more, though this time her expression held none of the uncomplicated excitement of the year before, replaced instead by a hard-won respect for how far her friend had traveled. Walter walked Clara the short distance across the garden, his health restored enough that his steps were steady, his eyes once again brimming with tears, though this time they carried the particular weight of having watched his daughter survive something that might have broken a lesser spirit. Eleanor sat in the front row beside her husband, her handkerchief pressed to genuinely humbled eyes rather than performed sentiment. And Nathaniel, standing where he had stood a year before, spoke vows this time that he had written entirely himself, promising not perfection, because he told Clara he now understood that no one could promise that honestly, but promising instead complete honesty, patience with her healing, and a commitment to choosing her, actively and visibly, every single day for the rest of his life, not because it was expected of him, but because he had learned, through nearly losing her entirely, exactly what she was worth. Clara often thought, in the years that followed, about that terrible moment behind the cracked vestry door, about the version of herself who had stood frozen in her wedding gown watching her new husband's betrayal unfold in the bright afternoon sun. She thought about how easily that moment could have ended everything, how understandable it would have been to walk away completely and never look back, and how much courage it had actually taken, not to leave, but to eventually choose to stay and rebuild something honest from the rubble. She came to understand that forgiveness had not been a single decision made in a hospital waiting room, but a practice she returned to again and again, a choice she renewed on the difficult days when old wounds ached, and a gift she gave herself as much as she gave Nathaniel. She learned that some of the deepest growth comes not from avoiding heartbreak but from walking directly through its center and discovering, on the other side, a strength she never knew she carried. If this story touched something in you, we would love to hear what lesson or emotion stayed with you the most, so please take a moment to leave a comment below sharing your own thoughts on forgiveness, second chances, or the strength it takes to rebuild trust after betrayal, because your reflections mean more to our community than you know. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Years later, Clara would sometimes stand in that same garden during quiet visits home, watching new couples exchange vows beneath the same stone archway where her own story had nearly ended before it truly began, and she would feel, not bitterness at the memory of that broken wedding day, but a deep and settled gratitude for everything that followed it. She had learned that a single devastating moment does not have to define an entire life, that the people we love are capable of profound and lasting change when they are finally willing to face the truth of their own failures, and that hope, however fragile it feels in our darkest hours, has a way of surviving even the most shattering betrayals if we are brave enough to nurture it. Her marriage, in the end, was not the fairy tale she had imagined on that golden June morning, but something she came to value far more, a partnership tested by fire and rebuilt with honesty, patience, and the quiet, daily choice to keep believing in each other even when belief felt like the hardest thing in the world. And whenever she thought back to the frightened, heartbroken young bride who had once stood frozen behind a cracked vestry door, she felt not shame for the pain she had carried, but a profound tenderness for the woman who had somehow found the strength, through her darkest week, to walk toward healing instead of away from hope, proving that even on our worst days, the story is never truly finished, and love, real love, given the chance to be honest, can still find its way home.